Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves trudging up a muddy hill, breath misting in the early morning air, as the dull clang of iron on wood echoes across the valley. The sun is just beginning to peek over the horizon, but sleep won, come easily, not with the creaking groan of siege towers being wheeled into place, and the shrill orders of engineers shouting about counterweights and lever arms. You blink through smoke and fog, watching as a group of medieval soldiers stumbles around half-assembled contraptions that look like someone gave a group of drunken carpenters too much rope and not enough supervision. You've arrived at a castle under siege, and whether you're a peasant, a page, or just very, very unlucky, you're going to spend the next several months listening to a symphony of wood splitting, rocks flying, and people screaming about angles and traction. You probably won't survive this, but hey, at least you'll know how to build a trebuchet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm always curious who else can't sleep at 2 brewing s. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at the very start of a medieval siege, where chaos reigns and planning is aspirational at best. Siege engines don't just materialize. Someone has to design, build, and drag them up to the enemy's front lawn, preferably without getting skewered by archers in the process. That someone, unfortunately, might now be you. Around you, a dozen grubby engineers. Yes, that was a real job. Haul beams of wood, twist heavy ropes, and mutter about fulcrum points. You squint at a design sketched in charcoal on a piece of cured leather. It might be a catapult, or it might be a horse with extremely straight legs. It's hard to tell. Siege warfare is an architectural nightmare. It's chess with extremely sharp pieces, and the board is made of mud. As you take in the surroundings, the walls of the besieged castle loom in the distance, thick, gray, unbothered. Inside, defenders are already preparing. Archers knocking arrows, boiling water being readied, and probably someone frantically praying for rain. Outside, you're watching what can only be described as a medieval version of a construction site. If every crane was made of oak, and every builder smelled like smoked cheese. The earliest siege attempts were crude, long before the sleek, terrifying trebuchets of later centuries. Besiegers mostly relied on brute force and what could be carried on a cart. Ladders were common, but their success rate was somewhere between unlikely and you're kidding, right? Still, they were cheap, fast, and didn't require knowledge of geometry, which was a plus for the average conscript. Then came the idea of big wooden things that could throw other things. But here, at the beginning of this siege, even those are still being assembled. You walk past a half-constructed siege tower. It's lopsided. One wheel is just a barrel. A soldier sits on top, chewing an onion and looking deeply unconvinced by the whole operation. This was typical. Siege equipment was expensive, temperamental, and took weeks to build. Materials had to be gathered or looted nearby, because transporting a 30-foot trebuchet from your home city was not exactly feasible. You used what you had, and what you had often came with termites. The wood was green and would warp. Ropes would stretch or snap. Wheels would buckle on uneven ground. But morale was surprisingly high. There's something weirdly energizing about throwing a rock at someone else's house. But as you're quickly learning, None of it happens fast. The first few days of a siege were often just awkward standoffs. Scouts measured distances. Engineers argued. Soldiers practiced dramatic yelling from behind bushes. You hear one commander bellowing, "We'll have their gates by moonrise." A bold claim considering his men are currently trying to figure out which end of the battering ram is the front. You watch as a team attempts to plant the first stakes into the ground, marking out where the trebuchet will stand. A light drizzle begins. The mud gets thicker. Someone slips and falls into a wheelbarrow full of pig fat. It's less a fearsome display of might and more a slapstick routine. Still, even now, you can sense the tension. Siege warfare was a waiting game, but also a mental one. The defenders inside the castle aren't relaxing. They know what's coming. If this crew of bickering engineers can ever get their machines built, there will be days, maybe weeks, of relentless bombardment. Walls will crack, towers will sway, and the people inside will get very good at praying and very bad at sleeping. A fun fact, some of the earliest siege tactics didn't even require fancy machinery, just fire, lots of it. You spot a pile of pitch-soaked logs stacked nearby. If all else fails, someone's planning to light that and roll it toward the gate, which sounds more cinematic than effective, especially in this weather. But that was part of the charm. Early siege warfare was half science, half medieval improv. Historians still argue whether the engineers in these early sieges had formal training or were just the guy in the village who built a nice cart once. Some kingdoms had dedicated siege teams, but most relied on craftsmen, blacksmiths, or the aforementioned cart guy. And while some of their inventions would go down in history, others went down in flames, literally and figuratively. A fringe tidbit for you. During one siege in France, an attacking army brought a massive wooden siege tower that was too tall to fit under the trees they needed to pass through. The army tried to cut down the trees, which took days, giving the defenders plenty of time to shoot flaming arrows at the tower until it caught fire and collapsed. Logistics. Still the undefeated champion of warfare. Back in the present moment, you huddle near the half-finished catapult, watching a group of men try to test the counterweight using a barrel of wine. It spills. Everyone shouts. One man begins crying, not because he's hurt, but because that was the good wine. You sigh. The siege has only just begun, but sleep already feels like a memory. Between the rain, the hammering, and the loud discussion over whether this part goes on top or bottom, your chances of a peaceful nap are as flimsy as the siege tower's support beams. Still, something about it is almost comforting. There's a rhythm here, a muddy, creaky, slightly drunk rhythm that lets you settle in. You wrap your cloak tighter, lean against a hay bale that smells like damp goat, and let the chaos lull you, because soon, very soon, those engines will be finished, and the real noise will begin. You're standing a little closer to the wall now, dodging the occasional arrow, and wondering how anyone ever thought this would work. The enemy castle looms just ahead, all smug stone and high towers, while your side, well, your side is currently throwing rocks by hand, not metaphorically, literally. A gang of underfed soldiers, some shirtless, others in dented helmets, 2 sizes too big, are hurling fist-sized stones at the outer wall with a dedication that's admirable, but utterly futile. You watch as a rock arcs through the air, bounces off the masonry, and lands with a dull plop in the mud. One soldier cheers like he's just slain a dragon. Another throws a second rock and accidentally hits one of his own men in the back. That man sits down and refuses to participate further. These are the early days, siege warfare, when strategy mostly meant do what the other guy isn't expecting, which in this case might be surviving, out of sheer absurdity. Climbing ladders was a popular tactic. You might have seen them in movies. Heroic soldiers charging up toward the battlements, while arrows rain down, dramatic music swelling. In reality, climbing a wooden ladder while people dump rocks, boiling water, or small furniture on your head was about as effective as asking politely to be let in. Still, people tried. Wooden ladders, hastily nailed together, would be leaned against the walls while attackers scrambled up them like over-caffeinated squirrels. The defenders above waited with long poles and grappling hooks to push them back down. Sometimes they succeeded. Sometimes the ladder broke on its own. Sometimes the attackers made it up only to realize they had no plan for what came next. You spot one particularly ambitious man lugging a ladder toward the wall alone. It's taller than he is. Every 5 steps it sinks into the mud. He keeps going, muttering something about glory and vengeance. A few minutes later, he reaches the wall, props up the ladder, starts to climb, only for the entire thing to fall backward in slow motion. He lands with a loud oof, waves off help, and trudges back to try again. Persistence, a noble, if painful trait. Historians still argue whether these kinds of assaults were meant to succeed or simply serve as a distraction, while the real siege efforts, like tunneling or building engines, were underway. After all, they did occasionally work. A particularly distracted or poorly defended wall might fall to sheer human wave tactics, but most of the time, they just didn't. You can take help, but think how different all of this might have been if they had better tools. But in this era, siege equipment was expensive and scarce, and so much of the burden fell on sheer physical effort. Ladders, ropes, handheld hammers, courageously stupid ideas. One lesser-known tactic involved sapping, digging a trench up to the wall and then trying to fill it in behind with dirt to make a ramp. In theory, it would allow you to march straight up to the walls. In practice, defenders noticed pretty quickly and usually set fire to the dirt pile. Fire, it turns out, was the medieval version of duct tape. It fixed a surprising number of problems, including people trying to climb your walls. You see a different group now, dragging what appears to be a massive slingshot. It's more stick than weapon, but someone clearly believes in it. They wedge it into the ground, pull back the band, made of what looks suspiciously like braided horsehair, and release. A pebble whizzes forward, bounces off a helmet, and disappears. The team cheers anyway. Morale is high, even if expectations are not. And here's a fringe tidbit for you. During one siege in the 11th century, attackers tried to throw beehives over the walls using catapults. It worked better than expected. Until the wind shifted, the bees were not pleased. No one really won that day. Meanwhile, you hear one commander pacing behind the lines, barking orders about pincer movements and taking the southern parapet. None of his soldiers appear to know what a parapet is, and one quietly asks if it's edible. Strategy meet reality. The wall itself is silent. A few defenders occasionally poke their heads over the top, shout something rude in Old French, and duck back down. One throws a turnip. No one knows why. From your vantage point, you can see the frustration beginning to mount among the attackers. Rocks don't work. Ladders fall. And the wall, stone, thick, indifferent, is just sitting there, like it knows, like it's judging. You walk among the troops, many of whom are dozing in the mud between volleys of ineffective throwing. Their hands are scraped, their backs ache. Their morale wavers between grim humor and wild optimism. One man has drawn a crude, smiley face on his shield for emotional support. Another has tied 3 rocks together with twine and insists it's a prototype. No one has the heart to disagree. And yet, as silly as it looks, there's something terrifying in this chaos. Because even if none of it works today, it will eventually. Siege warfare was about pressure, persistence, and attrition. You don't need one brilliant move. You just need to keep applying strain until something cracks. A wall, a gate, a soldier's spirit. You glance back toward the camp. More engineers are arriving now, and with them, bigger pieces of equipment. The rocks you've seen so far were just warm-ups. Soon, machines will arrive that can hurl boulders the size of pumpkins with the force of a train. The defenders probably know this. They're waiting, stockpiling, whispering. One last glance at the ladder team. They've managed to get one soldier halfway up before it slides sideways and dumps him into a puddle. He stands up, drenched, raises his sword in triumph anyway, and is immediately hit with a turnip. You both pause. Then he laughs. You laugh too. War may be hell, but it's also occasionally hilarious. You shuffle a little farther down the muddy siege line, drawn by the growing crowd gathering around something big, angular, and creaky. It's hard to miss. A massive, wooden contraption, shaped like the angry cousin of a harp and a ballista, had a child during a thunderstorm. This, dear listener, is a ballista, a glorified, terrifyingly oversized crossbow designed to launch giant bolts or iron-tipped spears with deadly force and questionable accuracy. It stands tall on a wooden platform, its thick bow arms stretched taut by ropes. Wound tight like a cranky grandmother's bun, soldiers mill around, some hauling bolts, longer than a man's leg, others squinting downrange, like they re-auditioning for the role of next guy to blame. When it misses, you sidle closer, and the commanding engineer, a man with soot-smudged cheeks and a voice like gravel, nods toward the frame. This beauty, he croaks, can punch through a castle wall at 50 paces, or a goose at 5. If it's a really unlucky goose, he's not entirely wrong. The ballista, inherited from the Romans and improved, or complicated, by medieval minds, was a marvel of torsion-powered engineering. Twisted ropes made of horsehair or sinew store enough energy to launch a wooden bolt with the power of several horses galloping into your spleen. In theory, one bolt is carefully loaded now. It takes 3 men and a lot of dramatic grunting to winch the throwing arm back into position. You can practically feel the tension in the air, and not just in the ropes. Everyone steps back. The operator pulls the lever. Thunk. The bolt screams forward with a sound like a giant splitting firewood. It zips across the field and embeds itself in a tree several feet left of the target. Everyone freezes. Someone coughs. The engineer claps politely. Could have been worse, he says cheerfully. Historians still argue whether ballistae were effective siege weapons or more psychological props. Loud, menacing, and occasionally fatal, but often frustratingly inaccurate. They were certainly more common in open battles or naval engagements, where their range and power could shine against thick castle walls? Let's just say mixed results. But the sound alone could be demoralizing. Imagine crouching behind a wall and hearing the twang thunk every few minutes, knowing that even if the first few missed, one could always hit a gap in the battlements or send debris flying with lethal consequences. You'd definitely keep your head down. You watch now as a second bolt is loaded, this time a heavier one with a sharp iron tip. The operator mutters a quick prayer, probably more out of habit than faith, and releases. The bolt slams into the stone wall with a dramatic crack, leaving a shallow dent and a whole lot of echo. The crowd murmurs approval. As impressive as it looks, the ballista has its quirks. Maintenance is constant. The ropes must be kept dry and tightly wound, which isn't easy when the entire battlefield is damp and muddy. One wet night, and suddenly, your siege weapon is less machine of death and more large wooden disappointment. Fun fringe fact: some medieval armies attempted to fire 2 bolts at once from modified ballistae, thinking it would double the damage. Instead, it usually just caused the entire frame to snap violently, often injuring the crew. As you watch a nearby assistant nervously inspect a crack in the wood, you can't help but wonder if someone here tried the same stunt. Still, despite the risks, there's something beautiful in the design, the symmetry of the forms, the balance of tension and release, the simple elegance of a weapon that's basically, what if we made archery more terrifying? You run your hand along the smooth timber, worn by time, stained with oil, and imagine what it must be like to man one during a real battle. Behind you, a few archers nudge each other and whisper. You turn to look and realize they're re-watching a rival team across the field, assembling their own ballista. This one's smaller, but sleeker, with a reinforced trigger mechanism and freshly lacquered wood. There's clearly some siege engine envy going on. You'd almost expect one of them to hiss. Ours has better range, like children comparing kites. And yet, you also notice how delicate the mechanism really is. A single misaligned bolt can jam the whole arm. A sudden gust of wind can throw off the aim. The enemy, smart as ever, might even start sending flaming arrows to burn the dry wood or distract the crew during loading. You step back as the crew prepares a third shot. This time, they coat the bolt in pitch, light it on fire, and fire it with a yell. It arcs beautifully, then tumbles midair and fizzles out in the mud. Everyone groans. One soldier suggests adding feathers for balance. Another accuses him of thinking too much, like a goose. They argue. The engineer sighs deeply. Despite all this, the ballista remains a staple of the siege field, a sign that your side came prepared. It's a power move, even if it's more show than substance, because sometimes just having one made the defenders think twice. Could it hit a guard tower? Maybe. Could it take out a knight peeking over the wall? Probably. Could it do absolutely nothing and still scare the living daylights out of everyone? Definitely. You take one last look as the crew reloads. The engineer wipes his brow, mutters something about getting it right this time, and calls for more rope. A blacksmith trundles over with a fresh supply, still warm from the forge. The process begins again. Twist, crank, aim, hope. And you find a dry patch of ground, a rare luxury. Sit back and let the rhythmic creak of the torsion arms lull you into a strange, sleepy calm. The ballista might not be perfect, but it hums with potential, waiting, groaning, ready to strike. You close your eyes for just a moment, not because you're safe, but because you're tired, and because there's something oddly comforting about being near a machine that only sometimes explodes. The ground shudders slightly beneath your boots, and that can only mean one thing. Someone has finally decided it's time to move the siege tower. You turn just in time to see the monstrous wooden box begin to creak forward on wheels that look suspiciously borrowed from several carts and at least one broken wine press. It's a siege tower, all right. Tall, rectangular, covered in soaked hides to make it less flammable, and swaying like it had one too many pints before dawn. This isn't a machine of speed or grace. This is a slow, stubborn box of doom on wheels, and you're going to climb into it. Inside, it's dark and smells like wet hay and splinters. You squeeze past two nervous soldiers who are arguing over whether the top level is better for glory or just faster to die. The interior is a maze of ladders, beams, and platforms stacked atop one another like a medieval bunk bed designed by someone with a grudge against symmetry. From the outside, siege towers were meant to be terrifying. Mobile fortresses rolled across the field until they pressed up against a castle wall, allowing attackers to charge across drawbridges or gangplanks into the waiting chaos beyond. In theory, brilliant. In practice, well, you clutch one of the beams as the tower lurches forward. It moves at the pace of a bored ox, deliberate, plodding, and very squeaky. Each rotation of the wheels sends another complaint through the timber. You're surrounded by soldiers, trying very hard not to look scared. One hums a tune under his breath. Another stares fixedly at the floor. You realize you're sweating, and it's not from the heat. Historically, siege towers reached staggering heights, some as tall as 100 feet, like mobile wooden skyscrapers full of anxious men with swords. The towers often had multiple levels for archers, spearmen, and even crossbowmen, who'd rain projectiles down on defenders as they approached. Some had hinged bridges at the top that would drop onto the enemy's battlements, allowing attackers to charge across like very aggressive deliverymen. You peer out through a narrow slit and see defenders scrambling atop the wall. Arrows begin to whistle through the air, thudding into the tower's hide-covered exterior. Someone shouts below, probably encouragement, but it sounds more like panic. One of the archers near you knocks an arrow, leans through a slot, fires, and immediately gets hit in the helmet by a stray rock. He collapses onto the floor with a groan and a muttered curse. Another soldier drags him aside and takes his place. Efficiency, medieval style. The real problem with siege towers was their vulnerability. They were tall, slow, and notoriously difficult to maneuver across uneven terrain. A single muddy ditch could tilt the entire structure. Wheels could break, axles could snap. More than one tower collapsed under its own weight before ever reaching the wall. You glance at one of the massive wooden wheels now, and it's not confidence-inspiring. It's cracked, held together by rope, and slightly askew. You're pretty sure one soldier propped it up with a stick. A stick. Historians still argue whether siege towers were more successful as weapons or distractions. In many cases, their presence forced defenders to reallocate manpower or reveal hidden defenses. And even if a tower never made it to the wall, it might still allow archers to get close enough for a few valuable shots. Some commanders just wanted to look intimidating, And a 40-foot tall moving box with archers pouring out of it? Yeah, that qualifies. A fringe tidbit. During the siege of Rhodes in 305 BCE, long before the Middle Ages, but too good not to share, the attacking forces built a massive siege tower called the Helepolis, or Taker of Cities. It was over 100 feet tall, mounted on iron wheels, and covered in iron plates to protect against fire. It took days to move, and was eventually destroyed in a storm. Medieval engineers took inspiration from its design, but also learned, don't tempt fate with names like Taker of Cities. Back in your shaky tower, the structure groans ominously as it crests a small rise. You brace for a collapse, but somehow it holds. One of the soldiers shouts that they're almost in range. Almost. Just another 50 feet to go. About the length of a very determined goat sprint. Suddenly, the tower lurches sideways. You grab a beam as someone near the back loses their footing and crashes into a support post. The whole structure wobbles like a drunken bar stool. But, miraculously, it rights itself again. Outside, the arrows are coming faster now. You hear shouting from the wall, and someone throws a burning log that bounces off the side, sizzles on the wet hides, and dies out with a hiss. One of your companions laughs nervously and says, "That's why we soak it in urine." You really hope he's joking. The final stretch is the hardest. The wheels grind over the last patch of uneven ground, and with a jolt, the tower slams into the castle wall. A cheer erupts inside, followed by the distinctive clunk of someone pulling a lever. A drawbridge crashes down onto the battlements with a bang, and suddenly, it's go time. The soldier next to you charges forward, tripping over his own sword. Another sprints up the final ladder and disappears through the opening. You hesitate, heart pounding, not quite ready to follow. And honestly, you might just stay here a minute longer. The tower smells like damp lumber and fear, but at least it's not on fire. Yet, one last glance outside reveals something curious. The defenders on the wall seem bemused. They're pointing, not panicking. Then you realize the drawbridge hasn't landed on the wall. It's landed slightly to the left, suspended over thin air, wobbling uselessly. The soldier who charged up the ladder is now frozen, crouched at the edge, blinking at the gap. Someone behind him shouts, "Jump." Someone else says, "Wait for another gust of wind." So, no glory charge today. Just a brief pause, some light embarrassment, and a really awkward descent back into the body of the tower. Still, the message is clear. The attackers are serious. They've brought a mobile house full of angry, sword-wielding people to your doorstep. Even if the drawbridge missed, even if the tower shakes like it's built from driftwood, the next one might work. And the one after that? That one could be the end. You climb down from the upper level slowly, careful not to slip on the damp wood. The tower creaks around you, like an old man complaining about the weather. Outside, the sun begins to dip, casting long shadows across the field. You step out onto the grass, legs stiff, ears still ringing from the crashing drawbridge, and let the cool evening air wash over you. In the distance, another tower begins to roll forward. They'll get it right eventually. The sound you hear next is unmistakable, deep, rhythmic, and oddly satisfying. Thud, thud, thud. You follow it like a sleepwalker chasing a lullaby, only to find yourself in front of a battering ram in all its hulking, bonk-happy glory. It looks like a giant wooden log suspended beneath a slanted roof, hanging by chains and mounted on wheels that are half sunk into the mud. Its head is capped with iron, sometimes shaped like a ram, sometimes like a blunt, grumpy beak. Either way, it's built for one purpose: to hit stuff until the stuff gives up. You approach just as the crew gives it another go. The soldiers inside the frame chant together in a lazy rhythm, pulling the log back and releasing it with a satisfying whomp against the castle gate. The gate doesn't move. It just accepts the punishment like a stoic bouncer at a very exclusive tavern. Thud. Welcome to the subtle art of just bonking it harder. This was siege logic at its most fundamental. When walls done T-fall to fancy mechanics or psychological tricks apply force, repeatedly, relentlessly, like trying to open a locked door with your forehead, but with more manpower and fewer concussions. Usually, the frame around the ram is called a testudo, or tortoise, for its roofed design that protects the crew from arrows, hot liquids, and heavy objects dropped with great enthusiasm. You peek underneath and find a group of 6 very sweaty men who look like they've been doing this all day. One of them wipes his forehead and gestures to the ram lovingly. She's slow, he says, but she gets the job done. That's debatable. You watch as they swing again. The gate splinters slightly. One man cheers, then ducks as a pot of something hot and suspicious is dumped from the battlements above. It hisses off the roof with a steam cloud that smells like bad stew. That's another mystery. Was it boiling oil or just Tuesday's lunch reheated aggressively? Historians still argue whether boiling oil was truly common or just dramatic storytelling. Oil was expensive and precious, hardly something you'd waste on strangers with questionable hygiene. More likely, defenders poured boiling water, heated sand, or whatever they had in the kitchen. If you were really unlucky, it was a chamber pot. Sanitation was rarely a priority mid-siege. Back at the ram, the crew pulls again. The iron head smacks the gate with another dull crack. This time, a sliver of wood falls loose. The soldiers howl like they've just won a tournament. A small victory, but morale matters. Of course, rams came in all shapes and sizes. Some were simple, just a bunch of men holding a beam and charging at a gate, like a log-based conga line. Others were elaborate mobile bunkers, complete with layers of wet hides to resist fire. And then there were fire rams, tipped with burning resin to both break and burn the target. These, naturally, were more likely to also burn themselves, which was slightly counterproductive. You sidle around to the back of the ram, where an assistant is inspecting the wheel. Cracked and barely rolling, mud cakes the axle. The roof leaks, and the log has a suspicious wobble. You ask him how long it's been in use. Since last siege, he mutters. Might be cursed. One fringe story tells of a French siege in which a ram was carved from a tree said to be haunted by monks. The gate it struck did indeed collapse, but only after every crew member caught a mysterious illness. The defenders, completely fine. Coincidence? Or divine punishment for excessive bonking? You take a step back as the ram strikes again. This time, the gate groans. It's holding, but only just. The defenders are frantically reinforcing it now, shoving beams behind it, piling barrels, and, yes, stacking furniture. You spot someone shoving a wooden spinning wheel into the frame. Desperate times, spinning measures. There's a strange intimacy to this weapon, unlike trebuchets or ballistae that operate at a distance. The battering ram demands proximity. You're right there, close enough to hear the defender shouting, smell the splintering wood, and possibly catch whatever infection is festering in the damp hay at your feet. It's brutal, sweaty work. You either break the door or get broken by it, but it works. Slowly, brutally, repeatedly. It works. And still, the defenders have options. They might lower a murder beam, essentially a horizontal log dropped into place to absorb the blows. They might drop chains, nets, or logs to damage the ram itself. One particularly unhinged strategy involved tossing large animal carcasses onto the roof to startle the crew or damage the structure. Not elegant, but you try concentrating when a half-decomposed ox lands beside you. You duck instinctively as another arrow whistles past. The ram keeps moving, its rhythm now almost musical. Bonk, step, bonk, shout, repeat. You wonder how long this can last. A day? 2? In some sieges, rams were used for weeks, often at night, to disturb the defender's sleep. Imagine trying to rest with the slow, unending percussion of impending destruction outside your window. Kinda like living next to a neighbor with a drum kit and unresolved anger. The gate shudders again, this time visibly. A large crack zigzags through the wood, and a chunk falls free. You can see torchlight inside, shadows. Someone swears loudly, and a bucket of something wet is hurled out through the hole. You duck. It smells strongly of fish. You look around at the ram team, exhausted but glowing with the satisfaction of progress. One gives you a lopsided grin and says, 5 more hits, maybe 6. Then dinner. You don't have the heart to ask what's on the menu. You step back as they go for another pull. The ram swings. The gate trembles. The sky darkens overhead, clouds gathering like a silent audience. Maybe it'll rain. Maybe the defenders will hold. Or maybe the door will finally give, and this ridiculous, relentless log will earn its victory. You glance up at the towering walls once more, then at the ram, a crude, noisy, strangely noble machine. It doesn't launch fire, it doesn't fly, it just knocks, loudly, repeatedly, and sooner or later, someone's going to answer. You hear it before you see it, a low, tension-filled creaking sound, like the world's angriest swing set, followed by a whump that rolls across the field like distant thunder. Then, from behind a makeshift barricade of carts and hay bales, a rock the size of a wine barrel arcs through the air in a lazy, majestic curve, and slams into the base of the castle wall with a noise so deep it rattles your spine. You have just witnessed the medieval engineering marvel that is the trebuchet, a siege engine so elegant, so devastatingly effective, it may well be the original physics flex. It stands tall, proud, and slightly askew, like a giraffe made entirely of beams, ropes, and the kind of calculations only a man with a lot of free time and access to livestock could devise. The throwing arm stretches almost comically high, counterweighted with a massive box filled with rocks, lead, or sometimes, if you're feeling particularly extra, dead cows. You shuffle closer, jaw slack. The crew is already preparing the next shot. A few men scurry around, loading another projectile into the sling, while 2 others haul the counterweight into position using a winch that makes a sound like it hasn't been oiled since the last crusade. The lead engineer, a man with soot on his face and a chicken feather in his cap for no clear reason, turns to you and grins. Want to see how far it can throw a piano? You stare at him. We don't have a piano, he says wistfully, and gets back to work. Trebuchets are the undisputed kings of medieval siege engines. Unlike Torsian-powered weapons, like the ballistae, Trebuchets rely on pure gravity. You load a projectile in a sling at one end of a long arm. The other end is weighted, sometimes with thousands of pounds of ballast. Release the weight, and the long arm whips forward, hurling the payload in a high arc that would make any physics teacher weep with joy. They could launch stones over 300 pounds in weight across distances of 300 yards or more, far enough to clear most moats, fences, and someone's bad decisions. But they were not fast. Oh no. Trebuchets were the slow cookers of siege warfare. It could take hours to set up, aim, and reload between shots. But once you got into a rhythm, devastating, you watch as the next load is prepared. This time, it's a barrel filled with refuse and something unidentifiable. The engineer calls it softening the target. You choose not to ask follow-up questions. The arm is pulled back. The ropes are checked. Someone yells, "Clear," which might be the first sensible thing anyone has said today. The release pin is pulled. The counterweight drops with a boom. The long arm snaps forward, and the payload sails into the air like an angry comet. You follow its arc, holding your breath. It lands squarely on the battlements, scattering masonry and sending defenders scurrying like startled beetles. Everyone cheers. Someone tries to start a slow clap. It doesn't catch on. Historians still argue whether the most massive trebuchets, like the famous Warwolf, commissioned by Edward I of England, were really as enormous and powerful as described, or if chroniclers got a little carried away. The Warwolf was said to be so intimidating that a besieged castle surrendered before it was ever fired. Edward, in a glorious display of medieval pettiness, fired it anyway. Trebuchets weren't just military machines. They were status symbols. A well-built trebuchet told your enemy, "I have wealth, brains, and way too much time on my hands." It also told them, "I am absolutely willing to throw a diseased mule through your bedroom window." Because yes, trebuchets were used not just for rocks, but for biological warfare. Carcasses, rotting food, and other nastiness were lobbed over walls to spread disease and horror. The Mongols, always fans of psychological terror, reportedly hurled plague-infected bodies during sieges. Not very subtle, but effective. You watch as the crew resets again. This time, they load a basket filled with smaller stones, grape shot style. Not as dramatic, but excellent for showering a wider area with pain. One man tightens the sling with an expression of deep focus, as if he's aligning the stars. The release goes smoothly. The stones scatter beautifully across the battlements, like confetti, if confetti were deeply unpleasant. A fringe tidbit: in some medieval texts, there are stories of soldiers launching messages using trebuchets. Rolled up scrolls inside clay pots or wrapped in cloth were hurled over walls as primitive airmail. One particularly bold knight is said to have launched himself, allegedly surviving, though surviving in this case likely means long enough to regret it. As the sun begins to dip lower in the sky, the trebuchet crew pauses. They stretch. Some sit down to drink water, or maybe mead. The engineer walks a wide circle around the base, tapping beams, adjusting ropes. You notice a carved inscription on one support beam. Throw rocks, not tantrums. Sound advice. These machines were often custom built on site, requiring carpenters, rope makers, and knowledge of geometry that, let's be honest, wasn't always consistent in the medieval period. Trebuchets might take weeks to build and days to calibrate, but once they worked, they were unstoppable. as long as they didn't fall over. Yes, that happened too. Poor balance, weak joints, or wet weather could cause a trebuchet to buckle or, worst case, throw its payload straight up and back down on itself. You do not want to be on site for that surprise. You stand now at the edge of the field, watching the mighty arm reset once more. It's hypnotic. The rhythm, the creaking, the moment of silence before the release. There's something almost meditative about it, like a metronome for destruction. As the final shot of the day fires, another stone, this one carefully carved with a rude message. You hear it whistle through the dusk air and crash against the castle wall. A section crumbles. The defenders shout, and somewhere in the haze, a small trumpet gives an oddly cheerful toot. Victory? Not yet. But pressure? Definitely applied. You yawn, not out of boredom, but from the kind of deep weariness that settles in when you've spent all day watching flying rocks and shouting engineers. The trebuchet groans, resets again. It'll fire all night if you let it. A lullaby in the form of gravity, timber, and some really questionable math. You hurry, still blinking dust out of your eyes from the last trebuchet strike, when you hear a much snappier, sharper sound nearby. Not the deep, ponderous creak of gravity-driven machinery. This is faster, twitchier, and slightly chaotic. You follow the noise to a smaller clearing, where another siege team is gathered around what looks like a nervous catapult. Meet the mangonel, the trebuchet's scrappier, slightly unpredictable cousin. If trebuchets are the physics professors of the medieval world, mangonels are their over-caffeinated lab assistants who sometimes forget safety goggles. You squint at the machine. At first glance, it looks similar to the trebuchet. A long throwing arm, a large base, a sling or cup to hold the payload. But the difference lies in the power source. Where the trebuchet relies on counterweights, the mangonel is all about torsion. Think twisted ropes, made of horsehair, sinew, or any other stringy material they could find, storing tension like a slingshot. You arrive just in time to witness a demonstration. The crew loads a fist-sized rock into the spoon-shaped sling, winches the arm back with a high-pitched groan, and steps aside. A young man, clearly new, pulls the release pin. The arm snaps forward with a whip crack that sounds like someone just slapped a tree. The rock launches into the air and crashes into a tree 40 feet to the right. The engineer facepalms. The crew applauds anyway. Encouragement is important. Mangonels had their uses. They were smaller, lighter, and easier to transport than trebuchets. You could build one quickly with basic tools and available wood. They were nimble, like the archers of siege engines. But that agility came at the cost of accuracy and sometimes sanity. Historians still argue whether mangonels were ever truly useful against stone fortifications. Some sources say yes. Fire fast, keep defenders ducking. Others say they were mainly used to lob projectiles over walls rather than at them. Either way, their fire rate was high, and their aim enthusiastic. You crouch near the front as the crew reloads. This time, instead of a rock, they're using a clay pot. You raise an eyebrow. The engineer explains. Sometimes we fill them with bees. You stare at him. Not today, he adds quickly. That was just once. Indeed, bee bombs were real. One of many creative forms of biological warfare. Another mangonel team reportedly launched glass jars filled with snakes into enemy camps. The surprise factor was high. The long-term strategy? Questionable. The crew finishes setting the arm. Someone mutters, "Please don't explode," under their breath. The pin is pulled. The clay pot soars, beautiful, arcing, humming like an airborne mystery, until it splatters against the outer wall with a dull crunch. From the smell, you're guessing fermented something. Definitely not bees. Hopefully, you notice the ropes tightening around the torsion bundle. As the team resets, the tension builds visibly, like a coiled spring, ready to snap. That's the tricky part. The rope material stretches and wears out fast. Wet weather, rough handling, or overuse can cause a catastrophic recoil, something every mangonel operator fears deeply. One story describes a misfire where the throwing arm cracked in half and launched backward, flattening a barrel of pickled fish, and the soldier standing next to it. The fish survived. The soldier did not. Today's crew, fortunately, seems more careful. You watch as they load a smaller stone, adjust the angle with shims under the base, and fire again. This time, the rock lands closer to its intended target, a tower window. The stone breaks on impact, and someone inside yells something in a dialect you don't understand, but assume is not complimentary. Fun fringe fact: the name mangonel may come from the Latin manganon, meaning engine of war, but the term was often used interchangeably with other siege weapons, confusing scholars for centuries. Some chroniclers just called everything that flung things a mangonel, sort of the medieval miscellaneous folder. The mangonel crew is getting ambitious now. They load 2 stones. You watch as they huddle, arguing over angles and air resistance like amateur trebuchet whisperers. The engineer finally nods. The pin is pulled. The arm swings forward. The stones fly in tandem, and one collides with the other mid-air. Both drop like confused pigeons. Everyone stares. Then they cheer. Because really, what are the odds? There's something endearing about the mangonel. It's not the flashiest, or the biggest, or even the most effective, but it's trying. It's the little siege engine that could, if only it could, aim better. You take a moment to inspect the machine up close. The ropes are frayed. The throwing arm has grooves from repeated impacts. A small charm, a carved wooden rabbit, hangs from the frame, probably for luck. Or maybe it's a leftover snack. Hard to say. The soldiers are clearly fond of it. They pat the wood like it's a beloved dog. One of them hums a tune while oiling the joints. This isn't just a weapon. It's their machine, their strange, squeaky, occasionally dangerous pride and joy. A gust of wind kicks up dust. You squint toward the castle. The defenders aren't even bothering to duck anymore. They re-watching the mangonel show with the kind of wary amusement you reserve for street performers juggling flaming swords. Still, the mangonel crew isn't done yet. The final shot of the evening is loaded with something wrapped in cloth. A message, the engineer says. Or maybe a poem. You wonder what kind of poetry gets catapulted in wartime. The pin is pulled. The package sails over the wall. A moment later, you hear a distant shout, followed by a pause. And then, laughter. Maybe it was a poem. You smile, weirdly touched. Even in war, someone's writing bad verse and throwing it into enemy territory, like a medieval text message. You stretch your legs and back away from the mangonel. The crew is winding down, sharing bread and soup near the fire. You watch the machine as it sits there in the twilight, crooked, clunky, and dangerous in all the right ways. Not quite the elegant predator the trebuchet is, but it's got heart. And sometimes, heart is all you need to launch rocks at people. You catch the whiff, before you see the flame, a harsh, chemical sting that makes your eyes water and your instincts scream, "Step away." But of course you don't. You shuffle forward instead. Because what's siege warfare without a little danger? Just beyond a pile of singed shields and buckets of wet sand, a group of soldiers is preparing one of the most feared and mysterious substances in medieval warfare: Greek fire, the stuff of whispered legends, singed eyebrows, and royal nightmares. You arrive just in time to see a ceramic jar, sealed with wax, oozing a faint wisp of smoke, tossed with a grunt by a soldier who is clearly either very brave or very tired of his eyebrows. The jar arcs, hits the outer edge of the moat with a splash, and then, whoosh, flames burst outward. Not the cheery orange of a campfire, but a violent, almost liquid blaze, clinging to the surface of the water and refusing to go out. It sizzles, spits, and crawls across the moat like a living thing. The defenders on the wall recoil. You do too, your mouth dry. This, allegedly, is Greek fire, a compound so volatile it could burn on water, stick to skin, and keep blazing even when smothered. What was in it? No one knows for sure. Seriously, historians still argue whether it was made from petroleum, quicklime, sulfur, pine resin, or the tears of disappointed alchemists. The original formula was a closely guarded secret of the Byzantine Empire, possibly created in the 7th century by a man named Callinicus of Heliopolis. How it made its way into medieval siege warfare is unclear, but here it is now, smoldering and horrifyingly real. The medieval versions were likely imitations, part science, part myth. Some used oil mixed with pitch and resin, launched in jars or pumped through tubes. Others were just regular fire, made scarier by rumors. But the effect was the same: chaos, fear, and a lot of very panicked yelling. You watch as another soldier lights a crude torch and waves it near a rack of sealed pots. The others shout and scatter like pigeons at a wedding. The torch is quickly extinguished. The mood returns to mild dread. Nearby you notice a bizarre contraption, a long, brass nozzle connected to a tank. One soldier explains, far too casually, that it's a flame projector, powered by bellows. Like a dragon, he says proudly, before coughing from the fumes. You make a mental note to stand far away when that thing gets used. Some records claim Greek fire was once deployed via handheld siphons, hoses, or even mounted to ships for naval sieges. Picture a Byzantine war galley sailing in with literal fire breath. Not something you forget easily, or ever. A fun fringe tale. During a siege in the 12th century, a Greek fire weapon backfired due to a sudden gust of wind, setting the user's own camp ablaze. The commander, reportedly unfazed, said, "At least now we know it works." You kind of admire the optimism. As night falls, the fire crews prepare another volley. This time, they load jars into small catapults, mangonels, you realize, like the twitchy ones from earlier, and aim them at the castle walls. The projectiles are wrapped in cloth soaked in oil, and the fuses are short, very short. You take 3 large steps back, launch. The first jar crashes into the outer wall and explodes with a geyser of light. Fire licks up the stone, sending defenders scrambling for sand buckets and heavy blankets. A second jar lands just short, lighting up a patch of dry grass. Soldiers rush in with wet hides to stamp it out before it spreads to the siege tower. That's the downside of Greek fire, or any medieval incendiary, really. It's unpredictable. It doesn't discriminate, And if you don't handle it carefully, you are just one gust of wind away from lighting up your own camp like a festive bonfire. Historians debate whether some of these more dramatic flame-based weapons even were Greek fire, or if the term just became a catch-all for anything that burned in a particularly rude and theatrical fashion. Charcoal, saltpeter, fish oil. Plenty of things were flammable, only some of them got a legend. Still, the fear it inspired was real. Even the idea that someone had Greek fire was sometimes enough to break a siege. No one wanted to be on the receiving end of a surprise nighttime blaze, especially one that stuck to your armor like honey with anger issues. You find yourself watching the flames dance along the moat's edge again, mesmerized. There's something almost beautiful in it. The way it shimmers, the way it roars softly like a hungry beast. It's a reminder that the battlefield isn't just about swords and rocks. Sometimes it's about chemistry and chaos. The engineers start cleaning up. Buckets of water are dumped, to little effect, and sand is thrown by the shovelful. One soldier carefully caps an unused jar, cradling it like a baby. You sincerely hope he doesn't trip. You wander back toward the main camp, your nostrils still stinging. You can feel the heat in your bones. Even the sky seems to flicker. Behind you, the moat continues to smolder, smoke curling up in the moonlight. You lie down on your rough blanket, trying to get comfortable. You close your eyes, but in your mind, the flames are still dancing, burning on water, bending reality, defying logic. You roll onto your side and mumble one sleepy promise. No torches near the soup pot tomorrow. It's just past dawn, and the first thing that hits you isn't a rock or flaming jar. Thankfully, it is the smell. A sharp, meaty steam wafting from high above. You glance up and see a defender dump something from a cauldron over the parapet. Whatever it is, it hisses ominously as it hits the ground near your position. A soldier beside you sniffs and mutters, "Soup?" Another leans in. "Might be oil." And thus begins your introduction to one of the most debated tactics in siege warfare. The classic boiling liquid dropped from the battlements. Boiling oil? Or just hot water? You've heard the legends. Knights in shining armor, reduced to flailing heaps as they're drenched in scalding fat. Hooded defenders laughing maniacally as cauldrons of oil bubble like a witch's brew. But here's the thing. Historians still argue whether defenders actually used boiling oil at all. Why the doubt? Simple economics. Oil, especially olive oil, was expensive. It wasn't a tea like you could just run down to ye olde Trader Joe S and grab a 12-pack. Most medieval strongholds relied on what they had on hand, and oil wasn't always abundant. Plus, hot oil is dangerous to handle. A single slip, and you've just deep-fried your own parapet crew. So what did they pour? Likely contenders include boiling water, heated sand, lime slurry, burning pitch, or occasionally, urine that had been left out in the sun a little too long. If it was hot, sticky, smelly, or slightly cursed, it was fair game. From your position below the wall, it really doesn't matter what's being dumped. You just know it's steaming. It smells like onions and fear, and the ground hisses where it lands. You take a few discreet steps backward. You join a squad of soldiers preparing their shields with wet hides, soaked overnight in barrels of water to resist heat and flames. One man grins as he tests his makeshift umbrella. "It's like rain," he says, right before a steaming bucket of who knows what lands nearby and scorches a patch of earth black. No one laughs, Up on the wall, defenders work quickly. Cauldrons are set into place on iron grates, and teams of kitchen staff, yes, often actual cooks, manage the heat with practiced ease. If you're going to defend a castle, it helps to have a chef who knows how to simmer something to a threatening boil. A fringe tidbit: some castles had murder holes, openings built into ceilings of entry passages that allowed defenders to drop scalding liquids, rocks, or other gifts onto intruders below. Some even had sloped channels to guide hot fluids more precisely. It was like being in the worst spa you could imagine. No towels, no robes, just hot sand in your helmet. You hear the sudden splash of a successful pour, this time on a ladder team. The wood hisses as water or oil or soup, honestly, who knows, splatters across the rungs, sending one soldier tumbling into the mud below. He gets up, steaming slightly, looking more annoyed than injured. Still better than guard duty, he mutters. You watch the next round of liquid prep closely. This time, the defenders are stirring a bubbling pot of something thick and brown. The smell is not awful. Could be stew. Could be a glue-like compound meant to stick to armor and burn longer. You're not ruling either out. Siege cooks, after all, had to improvise. Historians speculate that heated sand might have been more common than oil. It was easy to heat, easy to scoop, and almost impossible to get out of chainmail once it entered. Imagine a beach vacation where the sand burns through your socks. Not a good time. Another favorite was quicklime, a chalky substance that, when mixed with water, like say the sweat of a terrified attacker, could produce caustic heat and severe burns. But again, that took resources and foresight. Most of the time, it was just hot stuff plus gravity. You wander up to the supply tent for your side and peek at the plan. There's a small note scrawled in shaky handwriting. Watch for soup drops. Don't waste shields. Practical advice. Meanwhile, down the siege line, a few more ladders are being hauled toward the wall. The defenders wait, spoons and ladles in hand. One flips his ladle like a baton. Show off. The first climber reaches halfway before a splash sends him back down in a swirl of steam and curses. Someone in your group has had enough. We need to stop giving them ideas, he grumbles, wiping muck from his visor. They'll be dumping roast chickens next. You wouldn't put it past them. You step back to observe again. It's not glamorous, this kind of warfare. It's not dramatic like the trebuchets or precise like the ballistae. But it's real, messy, personal. The kind of thing you feel, not just physically, but emotionally. There's something deeply humbling about being chased off a wall, not by arrows, but by the medieval equivalent of boiling potluck. A fun side note: during one siege in Central Europe, defenders famously dumped beehives from the walls, which then broke open among the attacking troops. No heat required, just airborne rage in bug form. You look around now and see the rhythm taking shape. Defenders load, attackers brace, liquids pour, shields sizzle. Someone swears, someone slips, someone else reloads. It's like a very aggressive tea ceremony, if tea involved blistering pain and molten gravy. The defenders call down jeers. Hungry? One shouts. Come up for seconds. Someone beside you mutters, hope they choke on their own seasoning. Tensions, like temperatures, are high. Eventually, the cauldrons run dry for now. The defenders step back, letting the pots cool. You sit down under your half-burnt shield and finally exhale. Your stomach growls. Because unfortunately, all this talk of hot liquids has reminded you how long it's been since your last meal. Someone offers you a chunk of bread. You chew slowly, gazing up at the blackened patch of wall. They'll refill those pots by nightfall. And you'll be waiting again, shield up, nerves frayed, half hoping the next splash is just water. You wake to the sound of a loud squelch and the distinct, soul-draining sensation of wet socks and mud. Welcome to the moat. Not in the moat, thank goodness, but close enough to smell it. A pale green ribbon of water snakes around the castle's base, thick with algae, floating reeds, and what might once have been a duck, possibly two ducks, possibly the same duck twice. The moat is one of those medieval defense features that looks more poetic in paintings than it does in real life. In reality, it's murky, slimy, and the kind of place where boots go to die. Still, here it is. Muddy, gross, and very effective. You step cautiously along its edge, trying to avoid slipping into the viscous soup. A soldier behind you isn't so lucky. One misstep, and he's in up to the waist, shrieking as something brushes his leg. He pulls himself out, soaked, stinking, and utterly convinced he now has moat-related curses. Originally, moats weren't always filled with water. Early fortifications had dry ditches that, while less dramatic, were just as effective at preventing siege towers, ladders, and battering rams from getting close. Picture trying to wheel a siege tower across a sudden 20-foot deep trench. Not happening, but when possible, medieval engineers filled those ditches with water, natural or diverted from nearby rivers, to make things even worse for attackers. Water moats didn't just slow you down, they made it nearly impossible to bring siege equipment to the base of the wall without it either sinking, rotting, or simply giving up in despair. You crouch beside the lip of the moat, poking the surface with a stick. It doesn't reach the bottom. That's not comforting. A soldier beside you comments, "If the moat doesn't drown you, the smell might." He's not exaggerating. The stench is an unholy blend of mildew, fish decay, and human history. Historians still debate just how consistently effective moats were in battle. Some sieges dragged on for weeks, precisely because the moat made direct attacks too costly. Others ended with attackers simply filling in the moat with dirt, timber, or less glamorously, animal carcasses. That's right. In some cases, entire siege crews tossed dead animals into moats to soak up the water and create crude, if deeply unpleasant, crossings. A fringe tidbit for you. During a 15th century siege in France, defenders reportedly filled their moat with so much human and animal waste that attackers abandoned their assault due to the unbearable conditions. A psychological victory, but probably not one you celebrate with a parade. You watch now as a small team of engineers inspects the narrowest section of the moat. They've got a plan, one that involves long planks, bundles of brushwood, and what might generously be called enthusiastic optimism. The idea is to create a makeshift bridge, just sturdy enough for a few soldiers to cross. You stay well out of the way as the first attempt sinks within seconds. One engineer curses, then points to a pile of barrel. "We float them," he declares. Barrel bridge. You respect the creativity, even as you imagine the many, many ways this will fail. Over on the castle wall, defenders are watching with amusement. One waves a flag with what might be a fish painted on it. You're not sure if it's a taunt or a menu suggestion. As you squint across the water, you notice movement just beneath the surface. It's probably a carp, Or a boot, possibly a carp wearing a boot. Regardless, you're not getting in that water. Yet some soldiers must. When it came to storming a moat, someone had to go first. That meant wading in with shields overhead, usually under a rain of arrows or worse. Sometimes they'd wear full armor, which is about as smart as swimming with bricks in your pockets. And sometimes, astonishingly, they'd actually get across, only to find the base of the wall too slick to climb. You hear a splash behind you. Another soldier went in. He's trying to retrieve a ladder that slipped. His expression suggests deep regret and some very wet socks. Interestingly, some moats were false defenses, built to look deep, but designed to be crossed at a few hidden, shallow points only the defenders knew. This let castle troops sally out when needed, launching sudden attacks on siege camps. One castle in Eastern Europe reportedly kept boats in its moat just for this purpose. Surprise medieval navy. Why not? You pull back from the edge as the engineers try their barrel bridge again. It almost works, almost, until one soldier tries to jog across and the entire thing tips, launching him into the water like a very confused cannonball. Back to brushwood. Someone sighs. Another mutters, or we just wait until winter and walk over. Honestly, not a bad idea. But time is of the essence. Every hour the siege drags on means more supplies dwindling inside the castle, and more irritation for the attackers outside. Moats buy time, and in siege warfare, time is everything. Time to starve your enemy, time to wear down morale, time to hope the opposing army gets bored, distracted, or diseased. As the sun climbs higher, you step away from the swampy edge and back toward the camp. A cook is boiling something that might be stew, or might be whatever he scraped off the last soldier's armor. Either way, it's food. You accept a bowl. Behind you, the moat gurgles softly. A wet sentinel keeping you out and keeping others in. No walls needed, just water, mud, and the threat of one very bad swimming lesson. You lie down beside a barrel, using your cloak as a pillow. The sounds of the moat, the burble, the splash, the occasional splashy scream, fade into the background. Not pleasant, exactly, but almost hypnotic. You shut your eyes and whisper, "Please don't dream about fish in armor." You wake to a low rumble, not unlike distant thunder, but the sky is clear, and no one nearby is humming ominously. You sit up, ears perked, as the sound repeats. Closer, louder. You feel it in your bones more than hear it. The ground beneath you trembles. A nearby soldier glances nervously at his feet. Then comes the crack. A jagged line splits the earth a few paces away. The soil shifts, groans, and finally sinks an inch or two with a soft hiss, like someone deflating a particularly grumpy bagpipe. Everyone freezes. You've just witnessed the start of something sinister, undermining the silent, subterranean art of bringing a castle wall down, not with force from above, but by digging beneath it. You get up and follow a small group of filthy, soot-faced men making their way to a tent marked with nothing more than a shovel jammed in the ground. Inside, it's dark and damp, and the air smells like old leather and mushrooms. A tunnel opens up at the back of the tent, supported by creaking beams, rope lashings, and more hope than structural integrity. This is the realm of sappers, the miners of siege warfare. You duck your head and step inside the narrow passage, your boots squelching in the soft soil. The heat is stifling. The tunnel is barely shoulder wide. and the torchlight flickers off the dirt walls in a way that makes every shadow look suspiciously like a cave-in waiting to happen. Sapping was a clever but dangerous technique. The idea was simple. Dig a tunnel underneath the castle wall, then either collapse the tunnel intentionally, causing the wall above to crumble, or fill the chamber with combustible materials, light it up, and let fire do the rest. In practice, well, things got messy. You shuffle forward behind a team of 3 men working with short-handle picks, scraping through the soil like determined gophers. One mutters about the smell. Another swears the dirt is too soft. A third just keeps humming a folk song about goats. No one seems entirely comfortable. Sappers were often recruited from miners, ditch diggers, or poor souls who owed someone a favor. Their work was essential, but hardly glamorous. They dug in silence, by torchlight, breathing stale air, and hoping they didn't accidentally tunnel into a latrine pit, a surprisingly common hazard. One fringe account from a 14th century siege describes a group of sappers who dug into what they thought was an empty storage room. It was, in fact, the castle's privy shaft. They emerged days later, covered in things no torch could cleanse, cursing architecture itself. You pause as one of the miners leans in to inspect a thin seam of stone in the earth. "Wall base," he whispers. "We're close." The team picks more carefully now, careful not to weaken the structure above too quickly. Timing is everything. Historians still argue whether fire-based mining or collapse by support removal was more effective. Some sources say burning was faster. Fill the chamber with dry wood, resin, and pig fat. Light it and run. Others point to controlled collapses as more predictable. Either way, the goal was the same. Make the enemy, S-wall, do something walls weren't designed to do. Fall down. You're shown the tunnel's fire chamber. A small pit lined with logs and kindling. A bucket of pitch waits nearby. "We light it at dusk," one miner says, wiping sweat from his face. Less wind, less risk of accidental pre-combustion, too. You hope. Back above ground, the signs are subtle. A slight lean in the nearest tower. A hairline crack in the stone where yesterday there was none. The defenders are watching nervously, too. They know what's coming, but they're not helpless. Many castles had counter-mining tunnels, shafts dug outward to intercept enemy saps. It became a subterranean duel, complete with muffled shouting, surprise pickaxe encounters, and occasionally full-blown fistfights underground. You peek into a smaller side tunnel. It's even narrower, designed to collapse easily if needed. One soldier tells you with glee that it's a decoy, meant to lure defenders into the wrong tunnel during a counter-dig. He grins like he's proud of inventing it. You nod slowly, wondering if he's named it. As night falls, the sap crew makes final adjustments. The fire chamber is now packed with oily rags, dried brambles, and a surprising amount of goose feathers. They spark well, someone explains. You believe them. A hush falls over the group. The fire is lit. The tunnel begins to glow a sickly orange. The sappers back away slowly, crouching as they move, eyes wary. The smoke thickens. Above, the ground vibrates. You race back to the surface. The stars are bright overhead, the moon sharp and pale. Then, from the base of the wall, you hear the groan. A deep, wooden, stone grinding sort of groan that makes your skin crawl. With a shudder, part of the castle wall collapses inward, tumbling down like a stack of poorly balanced books. Dust mushrooms into the sky. Stones scatter. A cheer rises from the siege camp. Someone yells, "Breach!" You duck instinctively. Another soldier trips over his own excitement and lands in a pile of gear. Chaos is brewing, but it's your chaos now. The defenders rush to reinforce the gap with carts, tables, anything they can find. It's messy, panicked, desperate. The wall was supposed to hold. Now it's just not there anymore. And all because a few men with shovels and too much time quietly carved the earth beneath your enemy's feet. You sit back, covered in dust, ears ringing. The wall is broken, the enemy exposed, and yet all you can think about is how many tunnels you just crawled through. You're never going into a basement again. Still, it worked. A hole in the wall, a clear path ahead, and the defenders scrambling to improvise. The power of silence, of patience, of dirt. You close your eyes, hearing the last clatter of falling stones echo across the valley. In the end, the wall didn't fall from above. It fell from underneath. You brush the last bits of tunnel dust from your cloak and make your way along the siege lines, feet aching, head still rattling from the wall collapse. But before you can even finish your first sip of something suspiciously sour from a wooden cup, a new noise cuts through the air, a harsh clatter, followed by a series of metallic pings. You turn to see a strange wooden scaffold, bristling with hooks, rails, and dangling weights, perched atop the enemy's wall, like a particularly aggressive treehouse. A soldier next to you nudges your elbow, points, and mutters, "Time for the defensive toys." And oh, what toys they are. This section of the wall is rigged with all kinds of medieval ingenuity. Hoardings, wooden balconies built out from the top of the wall, with floor slits for dropping anything unpleasant, murder holes built into gateways, just in case you were feeling brave, and even a giant wooden claw on a swiveling arm, swinging ominously in the breeze like a very medieval grabber tool from a carnival prize game. You squint at the claw. It suddenly lunges downward, catching a ladder mid-climb and yanking it free with a dramatic crunch. The soldier at the top flails, then falls, landing in a bush with a thud and a muffled, "I'm okay." This, my friend, is the medieval equivalent of Home Alone, a castle rigged with every possible form of anti-invader nonsense. You move closer to the base of the wall, taking in the range of contraptions. There's a funnel-like chute designed to concentrate boiling water into one poor sap's helmet. A hanging basket of stones swings back and forth, ready to dump its payload on anyone foolhardy enough to try another breach. One engineer is even testing out a wooden mechanism that drops caltrops, spiky bits of iron designed to stick in feet, wheels, or moods. Hoardings, the overhanging wooden walkways, were especially popular. They gave defenders an extra few feet of attack space, allowing them to shoot straight down or drop. Well, whatever came to hand. Rocks, burning pitch, boiling liquids, insults. The slats beneath their feet could be lifted or swung open, turning the walls into a vertical gauntlet of hurt. Historians still argue whether these hoardings were permanent structures or quickly constructed once a siege began. Some castles had stone corbels, jutting supports, built into their design, just waiting for hoardings to be added. Others built them from scratch in the early days of a siege, like decking out your house with last-minute holiday lights. That could kill someone. A fringe tidbit for you. At the siege of Carcassonne, defenders reportedly used a custom hoarding fitted with pipes to channel scalding liquids more efficiently, like a gruesome medieval gutter system. Efficient and evil, classic combo. You dodge sideways as a set of rolling beams, giant logs, spiked at the end, are pushed from an upper floor and crash into a cluster of ladders. The timbers splinter like matchsticks. Soldiers scatter. You catch one guy laughing hysterically, possibly out of fear, possibly because he's still holding a loaf of bread and refuses to let it go. The creativity of castle defenders was astonishing. Not content to simply shoot arrows or pour stew, they engineered whole mechanical systems to delay, maim, or discourage. Counterweights, pulleys, tripwires, pivoting drawbridges, collapsible staircases, anything that bought more time or caused more confusion. You peer up again and see holes in the battlements shaped like arrow slots. But these are angled downward. They're designed for plumbata, weighted darts hurled from above. Short range, brutal, and terrifying. One lands near your foot. You do your best to look unbothered. Suddenly, a nearby tower door swings open, and a troop of defenders rushes onto the wall with slings and fire pots. Small clay jars filled with pitch and wrapped in linen. They light them, spin them overhead like fiery yo-yos, and launch them onto siege towers below. One hits a roof beam, a flicker, a spark, then flames. Siege crewmen shout in panic, dousing the fire with water and wet hides. It's contained, but the message is clear. The walls are awake, and they are not amused. Defensive tech wasn't all complex either. Some of the best tricks were the simplest. Greased stones, nearly impossible to climb. Shutters that could close instantly to block incoming arrows. Even poles with iron hooks to snag climbing ropes and pull them back over the wall like unwanted party streamers. You step back and take it all in. The smoke, the yells, the rattling of ropes and beams. A castle under siege isn't just a fortress, it's a machine, designed not only to repel, but to retaliate. Every stone in its wall, every beam jutting from its towers, is part of a larger, angry organism. A fun moment. One soldier in the hoardings above accidentally drops a loaf of hard bread instead of a rock. It hits a helmeted attacker with a dull thunk. The attacker looks up, confused. The defender shrugs. "Use what you've got," he says, tossing a slightly moldy apple next. It's not all fire and steel. Sometimes it's stale carbohydrates. You wander toward the quieter end of the wall, where a group of engineers is testing a crank-powered spike trap, a lattice of sharpened beams that rises from the ground like wooden fangs. It creaks, groans, and gets stuck halfway. They curse, kick it, and try again. Eventually, it deploys with a satisfying snap. One engineer kisses it, proudly. Even the gates are fortified. Portcullises, heavy iron grills, can be dropped in an instant to trap attackers. Some castles had double gatehouses, a trap within a trap. Invaders would enter, the first portcullis would slam shut, and the defenders above would unleash arrows, spears, and occasionally livestock into the enclosed space. Surprise! Welcome to the world's least hospitable foyer. You finally sit down at the edge of the siege camp, watching as the defenders reset their tricks. A fresh pot of something boiling is hauled to the wall. Another beam is slid into place. A defender waves to you with a ladle, smiling far too cheerfully for someone about to launch it at your head. The sun dips low, shadows stretching long across the grass. For now, the walls are holding, not just with stone, but with ingenuity, mischief, and a dash of insanity. You close your eyes, the sound of creaking hoardings and clinking hooks fading into a strange kind of comfort. If nothing else, you've learned one thing today. Never underestimate an engineer with too much time and access to medieval plumbing. You stretch your arms, brush off a stray caltrop from your blanket. How did that get there? And wander back toward the walls just in time to hear laughter, not war cries, not groans, but actual, honest laughter echoing faintly across the battlefield like someone forgot the assignment. You look up. On the ramparts, a defender is mooning the siege camp. Yep, that's a bare backside framed by 2 towers, and that's definitely not part of standard military protocol. Welcome to the weird, unruly world of psychological warfare, where noise, nudes, and nonsense become weapons, and the medieval battlefield turns into an absurd theater of distraction and insult. For all the brutality of siege warfare, it turns out that sometimes the best way to demoralize your enemy isn't with flaming pitch or sharpened hooks, but with well-timed taunts, outrageous noise, or good old-fashioned rude gestures. You wander through the camp and spot a group of soldiers hammering together a giant wooden puppet, complete with exaggerated arms and a face that looks suspiciously like the enemy commander. One man adds a poorly carved mustache. Another paints a crude symbol on its chest. You ask what it's for. Morale, he says with a grin. Ours. Mostly. Theirs. Hopefully not. That's siege psychology in a nutshell. When a siege dragged on for weeks or months, and they often did, boredom and frustration became weapons in their own right. Soldiers on both sides turned to mockery, noise, and spectacle to keep spirits up and grind enemy nerves down. At night, you hear the attackers take up drums, not in a rousing, let's march into battle sort of way, but slow, dull, repetitive beats, over and over. Boom, 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 like a heart that's given up, but still shows up to work. Some say it keeps time for centuries. Others say it keeps defenders awake, night after night, until sleep deprivation does what weapons can't. Historians still argue whether this kind of acoustic harassment was organized or just the natural byproduct of too many bored men with access to percussion. Either way, it worked. Castles under siege often reported insomnia, paranoia, and even hallucinations among troops after days of relentless sound. And noise wasn't the only weapon. Words were too. You see a rider gallop up to the walls with a scroll and a trumpet. He blows one shrill note, dramatically unrolls the scroll, and begins to read insults in the local dialect, loudly, with flair, something about goats and the castle steward's mother. You don't catch all of it, but the defenders do. A few yell back. One throws a shoe. This, apparently, is part of the official psychological protocol. Back in the camp, you hear a group of archers singing. Badly, off-key, but loudly. It's a local drinking song about turnips and regret. You don't recognize the lyrics, but the defenders must, because someone responds by banging a pot against the battlements in rhythm. A fringe tidbit: during the siege of Jerusalem in 1187, there are reports of Christian defenders launching letters wrapped around arrows to mock the besieging army's progress. Some messages claimed reinforcements were coming. They weren't. Others just contained rude jokes. Either way, the message was clear. You're not getting in anytime soon. But if you think the weirdness stops at insults and instruments, oh no. You catch sight of a defender on the wall, now performing what can only be described as mild, interpretive dance. He's spinning, gesturing, and miming, throwing a rock, only to pretend to drop it on his own foot. The crowd below laughs. Someone claps. One of your fellow soldiers mutters, "This is getting weird," then sits down to watch. And the nudity? Surprisingly common. A well-timed flash of unwashed skin was considered a proper insult. Baring one's bottom at the enemy wasn't just a joke. It was a gesture of defiance. You can't hit me. Also, look at this. Some of the boldest defenders even climbed out onto parapets with no armor, singing or jeering, while clearly in range of enemy arrows, daring, taunting, pushing boundaries. Most survived. Some didn't. Either way, their point was made. You walk by a tent where one officer is carefully coaching his squad on insult delivery. It's not just what you say, he explains. It's how you say it. You need contempt. Sneer a little. Get personal. He pauses. And don't use the goat joke again. It's tired. Nearby, someone has erected a flag made of trousers, flapping gently in the breeze, stitched with the words, "Nice try, siege guys." You have to admit, it's bold. But psychological tactics weren't all fun and nudes. Some were deeply unnerving. In long sieges, attackers sometimes catapulted the corpses of enemy soldiers, or more chillingly, the heads of captured messengers back over the walls. The message, "We're not just winning, we're watching." Defenders, in turn, might parade prisoners on the walls, threaten execution, or display captured banners upside down, a signal of utter disrespect. You return to your post as night falls. The drums begin again. Slow, steady, unyielding. The defenders answer with a flute, off-key. It almost sounds like a taunt, or maybe just a final act of defiance before bed. Someone lights a fire near the wall. Shadows stretch. The moon rises. You lie back on your cloak, eyes fixed on the dancing figures above. Men who, for tonight, fight with noise instead of steel. There's no trebuchet, no battering ram, no ladder rush tonight. Just laughter, mockery, and the steady beat of psychological warfare. One insult, one gesture, one sarcastic trumpet note at a time. You wake to scratching sounds, faint and persistent, like rats gnawing at the edge of a dream. You blink. Nope, not a dream. That's an actual rat. Bold, beady-eyed, and currently helping itself to your breakfast crust. Welcome to life inside a siege. No flaming projectiles here. No roaring trebuchets or witty wall-top taunts. Just the slow grind of human survival as the days drag into weeks and the walls that once promised safety begin to feel more like a prison. You're in a granary turned barracks, one of dozens tucked into corners of the besieged castle. The floor is straw, the ceiling leaks, and the walls are stacked with sacks of barley and grain, most of which are now inhabited by either bugs or soldiers. You sit up. The air smells like mold, sweat, and cooked cabbage. 3 smells that seem to breed aggressively in enclosed medieval spaces. A pot boils over a low fire in the corner. The contents unidentifiable. A guard stands nearby, poking it with a stick. You decide not to ask. During a siege, defenders had to transform their entire way of living. Courtyards became tent cities. Cellars became hospitals. Chapel altars were pushed aside to make space for stores of salted meat. Every square foot counted, and nothing was wasted, except maybe that stew. You make your way up the winding stairs to the battlements. The wind hits your face like a cold slap. From this height, you can see the enemy's camp spread out across the valley, smoke curling from dozens of fires. They're not in a rush. They don't need to be. That's the power of a siege. If you're patient, hunger will do what no weapon can. You duck as a rock sails overhead, not from an engine, but from a slingshot, just part of the daily rhythm now. You nod to a fellow watchman who, is practicing bird calls while keeping an eye on the field. Then comes the drum. Not the war drum, but the drum. It's been going for 2 days straight now. Boom, boom, boom. Same rhythm, never speeding up, never slowing down. It's psychological warfare, sure, but it also feels like your entire skull is keeping time. One soldier mutters, "I hear it in my teeth." Another nods solemnly. You head back down to the lower halls, where families are clustered around fires. Yes, families. Not everyone in the castle is a soldier. There are cooks, blacksmiths, servants, and children, all huddled behind the walls, hoping the siege ends before the food, or their patience, does. You pass a young girl playing with a rag doll. She's made it a tiny sword out of a chicken bone. You try not to find that symbolic. The ration lines are forming now. Everyone gets a little less today. The quartermaster reads off portions like a grumpy school teacher. Half a loaf, 2 sips of wine, and a wedge of something that was cheese in a previous life. You eat slowly, not for pleasure, but to fool your stomach into thinking it was more. Historians still argue about just how sustainable some of these siege rations were. Officially, many castles could last for months, but realistically, spoilage, theft, infestations, and sheer human exhaustion usually shortened those timelines, especially once the rats showed up. You glance down and spot another rat scurrying across the stones. Smug and well-fed, some castles hunted them, others just gave in. There are even reports of rat meat ending up on ration lists, ranked slightly above boiled leather, but below boiled bootlaces. A fringe tidbit. During one siege in the 15th century, a besieged noble reportedly roasted the family's pet falcon and shared it with the garrison. It was symbolic, he said, sacrificing pride for survival. His children didn't speak to him for weeks. Back in your corner of the granary, someone's trying to tune a lute. Yes, a lute. 'Cause even now, music matters. Anything to break the monotony. The player strums a rough, clunky tune that sounds like it was written by a man in a bad mood with cold fingers. It's awful, and it helps. You lie down again as the wind whistles through a crack in the stone. Someone nearby is snoring. Someone else is grinding grain with a mortar and pestle. Slowly, steadily, like they're counting minutes. Instead of crushing wheat, every hour crawls. Time inside a siege becomes a kind of performance. Routine, replacing panic. Check the walls. Check the food. Watch the camp. Wonder when relief will come, or if it will. There are rumors of a sally, a sudden push to break out or burn enemy equipment. But those are just whispers, passed around like bedtime stories. For now, everyone waits. Night comes. You wrap yourself in a rough wool blanket and listen to the familiar sounds. Rats in the grain, the wind against the tower, the drum, always the drum. Someone laughs in the distance, maybe from the enemy camp, maybe from your own. You're too tired to care. The fire crackles low. The doll with the chicken bone sword rests beside its sleeping owner. And you? You drift off in the straw, still wearing your boots, still clutching your dagger, half ready, half hopeless. The siege continues. You wake to your stomach, making a noise that can only be described as contemptuous. It sounds like it's chewing on itself, again. You sit up slowly, brush a few kernels of grain from your tunic, and survey the room full of people pretending they're not starving. Welcome to the long wait, the slow grinding part of a siege, when there's nothing left to do but count the days, chew the memories of past meals, and silently resent every bird that flies overhead with its smug, fat little belly. There's no fighting right now. No fire, no ladders, no yelling, just hunger. Deep, bone-hollowing hunger. The grain stores are low. The dried meat's been gone for weeks, and the stew has entered that dangerous phase where no one asks what's in it. Today it's thin, very thin. You swear it tastes like boiled parchment. Might actually be boiled parchment. You make your way to the wall. The siege camp is still out there, silent and patient. The enemy doesn't have to storm the gates. All they need is time, and nature will do the rest. That's the genius and cruelty of starvation tactics. They require little manpower and no clever strategy. Just wait until the other side breaks down one stomach at a time. You chew on a piece of bark. Not joking. Bark. It's been peeled, soaked, boiled, and dried again. They say it tricks the tongue. Your tongue remains unconvinced. You overhear a conversation about shoe leather. Someone's boiled theirs 3 times to soften it, scraped off the wax, and claims it's chewy, but filling. You're not there yet, but you're not far off. Historians still debate how common this sort of desperation really was. Chroniclers, always a dramatic bunch, loved to report cases of cannibalism, dog roasting, and soup made from belts, but modern scholars suggest these were likely exaggerations or rare extremes. Though, during some of the worst sieges, even the absurd started sounding plausible. A fringe tidbit. During the siege of Jerusalem in 1099, one crusader chronicled people digging up graves to look for anything edible. Whether that's metaphor or madness, we'll never know. But the desperation was real. You pass the baker's corner. His oven hasn't been lit in days. He's making flourless bread now, basically mashed weeds, pressed flat and baked on a hot stone. It crumbles like regret and tastes about the same. Back inside the granary, there's talk of a rat hunt tonight. Not for sport, not for pest control, for food. A few brave souls have fashioned traps from old tools and string. One man swears he can cook it like pheasant. You give him a long blank stare. And then there's the cat. Or rather, there was a cat. Used to roam the courtyard like royalty. Sleek, smug, well-fed. No one's seen it in 3 days. You try not to think too hard about that. In the chapel, someone's organizing a fasting vigil. A polite way of saying, let's starve for spiritual reasons, instead of because the pantry is empty. A few join in. Others roll their eyes. You can decide whether it's sincere or just the best use of an empty stomach. You notice tempers are shorter now. A man snaps at a boy for spilling half a cup of lentils. Another fight breaks out over someone hoarding dried apples. It's broken up quickly, but the tension lingers. Hunger changes people, makes them quiet, makes them mean. You watch as an elderly woman gives her bread crust to a child, then sits down with an empty bowl, like that was always her plan. You don't say anything. No one does. In a siege, small acts of kindness stand out like stars. At dusk, a soldier returns from the lookout post with news. A bird has landed on the tower. Everyone rushes up to see it. It's just a pigeon, but for a moment, it's magic. Then someone suggests catching it. Several people lunge. The bird flies off, dropping something unpleasant on a helmet as it goes. You sigh. Back by the fire, a young man carves something into the stone floor with a piece of bone. Days counted. Tallies scratched into the stone, one by one. You count along. 47. You can't remember the taste of cheese. Not really. Just the idea of it. Was it crumbly? Soft? Salty? You're not sure anymore. Someone claims to remember jam. You accuse them of lying. They laugh. Sort of. And yet, amid the gnawing emptiness, there's still structure. Ration calls. Watch duty. Clean-up rotations. Even hunger can't kill routine. It's all that stands between order and breakdown. At night, the wind howls outside. You curl up beneath a thinning blanket, stomach rumbling like distant thunder. Someone nearby dreams out loud, murmuring about roasted chicken, dripping fat, fresh bread. You don't dream. You just listen to the sound of quiet chewing, the clink of spoons in wooden bowls, the wind through stone cracks. The castle hasn't fallen. Not yet. But everyone here knows. It's not just walls that crumble under siege. Sometimes it's the people inside. The hunger dreams fade by dawn, replaced by something louder than your stomach. An urgent hush, the kind that scurries through corridors faster than any rat. You sit up and catch fragments, voices dropping to whispers the moment they sense ears. You recognize some of the words. Gatehouse, silver, tonight. They taste dangerous on the tongue. You follow the murmurs down a back stairwell, lit by a single guttering torch. The stone is slick with condensation, and every step echoes, even though you try to tiptoe. The whisperers are gone by the time you reach the landing, but their tension lingers, like the stale broth smell that haunts this whole place. Something is shifting inside these walls. And it isn't the mortar. Desperation, you realize, breeds creativity, but it also breeds treason. You wander past the chapel, where yesterday's fasting vigil has dissolved into half-hearted prayer and half-hidden dice games. In the corner, a gaunt guard mutters to a fat merchant, passing something that glints. Coin? Maybe. Keys? Possibly. Nobody meets your eyes. Everyone is practicing the new siege pastime. Plausible deniability. You step onto the battlements. The enemy camp is still there. Patient. Quiet. Cooking breakfast you can almost smell, if you let your imagination punish you. You watch the thin smoke curls for a moment, then notice two tiny flashes at the woodline. Lanterns signaling in the dawn mist. 1. Pause. 2. Pause. 1 again. You shiver, though the wind's not cold. Codes are being traded like gossip. It isn't unusual. Historians still argue whether bribery or outright infiltration toppled more strongholds than battering rams. Chroniclers loved to dramatize heroic assaults, but payroll ledgers, when they survive, tell quieter stories of silver pieces changing loyalty as surely as any catapult changed masonry. Why risk a ladder rush when you can just pay the night guard to forget which winch raises the portcullis? You think of a mainstream example. You can't help it. Siege life turns you into a walking encyclopedia of disasters. The Siege of Antioch, 1098. A single, disgruntled tower captain, Firuz, lowered a rope and let a handful of crusaders in. By sunrise, the city belonged to new masters, and thousands of defenders discovered that betrayal can move faster than trebuchet stones. Here now, you sense a similar crack running through morale, invisible but widening. A shout jolts you back. Down in the courtyard, two cooks brawl over a jug of watered wine. That shouldn't matter, yet everyone flinches, as though knives are drawn. You realize trust is thinner than the soup. You descend to the gatehouse, ostensibly to check the hinges, really to eavesdrop. Inside the dim chamber, a pair of armored guards lean close over a parchment. One taps a crude map, a dotted line from moat to postern door. The other glances over his shoulder, sees you, and coughs loud enough to cover the rapid folding and pocketing of evidence. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs as if to say, "Night shift paperwork, friend." Sure, a joke drifts through your mind. First of 3 today. Rule of siege comedy. What's the castle HR policy on treason? You whisper to yourself. Unlimited overtime, no severance, and a dramatic exit package. You almost laugh, but the echo sounds nervous. Afternoon drags in. You help stack loose barrels near the breach from the undermining, officially as makeshift barricades, unofficially as vantage points for listening. A mason beside you murmurs, cheaper to hire one liar than feed 10,000 archers. Dark wisdom. He wipes mortar dust from his beard and continues laying stones anyway, as if rebuilding a wall that might open from the inside any hour now. You recall a fringe tidbit you once overheard at a tavern during the siege of Civadal. In the 15th century, a spy supposedly signaled readiness by painting a loaf of bread with honey and sticking bird feathers to it, then tossing it over the wall at dusk. The outside contact saw the flying loaf, knew the gate crew was bought, and attacked that night. Sounds absurd, but after weeks of cabbage water, you'd notice a feathered baguette too. Evening approaches. The tension grows so thick it knocks against your ribs. The drummers in the enemy camp start a slow, steady tattoo. Boom, boom, pause, boom, boom, as though they're counting down to something. Inside, no one's cooking. They're all listening, eyes darting to doorways. You see the captain of the watch triple-check the torch supply, then walk off toward the armory with clenched fists. He's heard rumors too. At sunset, you climb the western tower for your shift. The sky bleeds orange, and torches spark one by one along the rampart. Far below, lanterns bob among the besiegers, gathering like fireflies. You suddenly picture the castle as a great stone heart, valves ready to open, letting an infection rush in. Your second joke of the quota comes unbidden. If Betrayal had a tavern sign, it would just read, "Happy Hour, all back doors half off." You snort softly. The archer next to you gives a puzzled glance. You wave it away. Night falls proper. You force your eyelids open, breath misting. From the courtyard, you catch muffled footsteps, hurried, then the soft squeal of a rusted hinge, a sound the quartermaster has sworn shouldn't exist, because all hinges greased, sir. You lean over the parapet just enough to see shadows, slipping toward the postern gate, outside the main wall. One carries a bundle, another a lantern carefully hooded. They move like men, rehearsing a play nobody else was invited to. You consider raising an alarm, but one of the silhouettes stops, looks up, and taps 2 fingers to his brow in what might be a salute or a warning. It's the guard from earlier, the one with the map. You freeze. The unspoken question hangs between you. Which side are you on? A creak, a clunk. The small gate opens a handspan. Enough space for a cart. No, enough for a negotiator. Outside, a figure in a cloak approaches, coin purse glinting. Words pass in hushed tones. You can't hear them, but the weight of silver is universal. The purse changes hands. The gate nudges wider. You remember the third joke, but it dies in your throat. Why did the gatekeeper cross the line? Because the paycheck was on the other side. too close to truth. Inside your chest, your heart battering rams. You slip down the stairs 2 at a time, boots barely touching stone. At the landing, you nearly collide with the captain of the watch. His eyes are flint. He's heard something too. You both break into a run. By the time you reach the postern, the gate is fully open, and half a dozen enemy scouts, already inside, knives out, faces hidden by scarves. For a heartbeat, everyone stares, shocked at the nakedness of the moment. Then steel rings. The traitor guard drops the purse and shouts, "Parley, terms." As if the word alone rewrites reality, an arrow answers, thunking into the timber beside him. Fighting erupts. Brief, brutal, loud enough to wake the chapel sleepers above. You throw yourself behind a barrel, adrenaline sharpening vision like new whetstone. 2 defenders push the gate, struggling to force it closed while blades spark nearby. You leap in, bracing your shoulder. A scout lunges. You duck, hamstring him with a dagger you barely remember drawing. He tumbles, swearing in a language thick with promise of revenge. Or maybe just frustration. Together you heave. The gate slams shut, iron latch dropping with a clang that feels heavier than stone. Outside, fists hammer wood. Inside, the traitor crumples, moaning it was supposed to be bloodless. You almost pity him. Almost. Later, when torches flicker over bodies being dragged aside, the captain orders the traitor shackled. Some call for execution, others for questioning. You turn away, suddenly exhausted beyond hunger, beyond fear. Historians still debate how many sieges truly ended by treachery, and how many by sheer force, how many by famine. But in this castle tonight, the ledger writes itself. 1 purse of silver almost bought what 10 weeks of arrows could not. You wipe a smear of blood from your sleeve and climb back to the battlements. The night drumbeat has stopped. Maybe the besiegers wait for a signal that won't come. Down in the yard, a lone lute plucks a shaky tune, strings buzzing like nerves. You whisper to the dark, cheaper than arrows maybe, but never cheap. A cold wind answers, rustling the feathered arrow fletchings beside you. Somewhere a rat squeaks, unimpressed by human loyalties. You pull your cloak tight, eyes on the gate that almost wasn't yours anymore, and pray, dawn brings silence instead of bargaining. The night passes with twitchy eyes and half sleep. You rest your head on your arms atop the wall, boots still caked in blood and dust, fingers still wrapped too tightly around a dagger you didn't intend to use. When the first gray light spills across the field, it brings no trumpet call, no surprise charge, just silence. Too much silence. You squint down at the enemy camp. The usual smoke trails are thinner, the movement slower. Men in cloaks gather near the siege engines, not to ready them, but to wrap them up. You blink. One of the trebuchets is being dismantled. Something's changed. A bell rings softly from the tower above you. Not an alarm, not the lunch call, but something in between. It tolls again. The sound drifts like smoke over the walls. You make your way to the courtyard, following others toward the gatehouse, where the captain stands with a scroll in his hand and a strange look on his face. Not relief, not joy, but wariness with a hint of disbelief. The scroll is unfurled, words read aloud, terms of surrender requested, hostage exchange offered, banner of truce raised at first light. A messenger from the besieging army stands just beyond the main gate, under the cautious cover of a white flag. And just like that, the siege begins to end. There's no cheering. Not yet. No running or singing or weeping. Everyone is too stunned. This is a moment you imagined again and again, but it never looked like this. So quiet, so civil. You climb the wall and spot the white flag, tied to a pike and fluttering lazily in the morning breeze. A small table has been set up between the camps. 2 chairs, a jug of wine. It looks more like a countryside picnic than the conclusion of a months-long slow-motion nightmare. One of the defenders mutters, "Hope they brought something better than stew." You watch as your captain and a few senior officers walk out to meet the envoys. No weapons, no armor, just cloaks, clean hands, and eyes that don't blink often enough. The truce terms will be negotiated here, in the gray zone, beneath a flag that says, "We're done now, maybe." And that's how most sieges really ended. Not with a final charge or glorious clash, but with conversations, with documents, with surrender negotiated by men too tired to lift swords anymore. Historians still argue whether this was always mercy or just the logical next step when all options ran out. Some cities bought their survival with ransom, handing over gold, jewels, or hostages. Others bartered freedom for the ruling class only, abandoning the rest to pillage. A few tried to bluff their way out. Some succeeded. Others ended up regretting their poker face. A fringe tidbit: during the siege of Calais in 1346, 6 burghers famously offered themselves barefoot and in sackcloth to the English king, hoping their public sacrifice would spare the city. Legend says their lives were spared by the queen, who thought the gesture was too noble to punish. Whether it's true or romanticized, it speaks to the strange theater of surrender. Back at the wall, you lean over the battlements, watching as the discussions unfold. A parchment is passed from hand to hand. The enemy commander points toward the gate, then to the breach from the undermining days ago. A defender gestures toward the food stores. What's left of them? There's a quiet nod. The white flag flaps. Inside the walls, everyone stands a little straighter. No one's celebrating. Not yet. Surrender, after all, isn't victory. It's just an ending. And sometimes, that's all people want. You walk past families packing their few belongings, soldiers oiling weapons, not for battle but for sale or surrender. Someone is baking again. Bread. Actual bread. Maybe it's symbolic. Maybe it's just habit. Either way, the smell is soothing. You pass the chapel. A priest is scrubbing blood off the steps. No one asks from which day. Some people clean because it's what they can do. You nod at him. He doesn't look up. At midday, the gates open. Not all the way. Just enough for a table to be carried back inside, now smeared with wax drippings and red seals. The captain returns, slower than he left, scroll in hand. He reads it once more to the gathered soldiers, this time out loud. Surrender, yes, but not total. Civilians spared. Garrison disarmed, but free to march out with weapons sheathed. The enemy will occupy for a time, but pillage is forbidden. Harsh taxes, yes. Harsh punishment, not this time. One soldier claps, a single awkward beat. Another follows. Then silence again. Relief is too complex for applause. You glance around. Some are already walking toward the gate to leave. Their homes behind them, their futures ahead, unpainted. Others stay, unsure. A few weep quietly. A few simply sit down, overwhelmed by the fact that at long last, there's no more need to be ready. You find a bench and lower yourself onto it, knees aching, eyes dry. You're not sure what comes next. You just know it won't involve boiling oil or ration lines. or wondering if that movement in the dark was a rat or a spy. For the first time in weeks, you can hear your own breathing without the soundtrack of drums. The white flag still waves, now joined by a second. This one the besiegers crest, soon to fly above the gate tower. You try not to feel anything about it. You fail. You lie back, staring up at a sky that's just blue, plain, beautiful, unremarkable. You close your eyes and whisper to no one in particular, "Let them keep the walls. I'll take the quiet. It's over." You tell yourself that again as you walk through what used to be a courtyard and is now a rubble field of burnt carts, shattered beams, and very confused chickens. But your feet still move, like you're expecting the next horn, the next fire, the next crash of stone on stone. The body doesn't let go of a siege all at once. It holds it, like tension in a jaw long after the argument ends. The gates are open. The enemy is inside, not looting, not burning, yet, but walking the same ground you defended, like it was always theirs. You pick your way through the debris. A broken siege ladder leans against a tree. A rusted helmet, still dented from that boiling mystery stew a few weeks ago, lies half buried in a patch of trampled cabbages. Smoke drifts lazily from the baker's chimney. His oven reignited, not for resistance this time, but for bread. Real bread, or what's left of it. But not everything is quiet. The aftermath of a siege isn't just about who survived. It's about what's left behind. In the main square, a crowd has gathered. The commanding officer of the now occupying force stands on a makeshift platform, barking orders to soldiers who look just as exhausted as the rest of you. There's a list, names of those being relocated, families assigned to new quarters, tradespeople requested for supply assessment. You scan the list without meaning to. Your name's not there. Not yet. And maybe that's worse. Historians love to talk about the end of sieges, like clean conclusions. The town fell. The garrison surrendered. Peace was restored. But the truth is messier. The walls don't rebuild themselves. The markets don't restock overnight. And the people, well, they rarely go back to being who they were before. You walk past a burned wagon, its frame bent like twisted ribs. A child is poking at it with a stick, humming a song. You don't recognize the melody. You're not sure if it's real or something she made up during the siege. Either way, you nod to her. She nods back, like you've both survived the same unspoken thing. A fringe tidbit: after the siege of Béziers in 1209, when the city was taken by crusaders, no effort was made to distinguish civilians from combatants. Thousands were killed indiscriminately. The famous quote, "Kill them all, God will know his own," is often attributed to that day. It might be apocryphal, but the idea wasn't. Siege aftermaths were rarely gentle. Today, though, is different. No swords are swinging. The enemy seems more interested in inventory than in punishment. You pass the chapel. It's still standing. The stained glass is cracked. A stone cross lies snapped in two on the ground. Inside, someone is sweeping the steps with the palm of their hand. The broom must have burned. You kneel, help for a moment, not saying a word. Dust rises in lazy spirals. In the courtyard, a few defenders have already changed tunics, trading their sigil-emblazoned garb for plain clothes. Some do it for survival. Some do it because they no longer believe in flags. You find the old guard post near the gate, the same post you manned the night of the traitor rumors. It's quiet now, abandoned, a few helmets, rest on a crate. Some broken, some just forgotten. You pick one up and realize it's yours. There's a dent in the side you don't remember. You set it down gently and don't look back. Some of the victors seem to be trying. A young knight you don't recognize helps an old woman carry a bucket of water. A cook from the invading army sets up near the square and starts ladling out thick soup. It smells of garlic and something earthy. You're not hungry, but your body says otherwise. You get in line. Someone from the old garrison stands in front of you. He turns, recognizes your face, and smiles. Not joy, not friendship, just that shared survivor's smile that says, "We're here, somehow. I thought it would feel better," he says. You nod. It just feels quiet. Later, you pass what used to be the armory, now stripped bare, swords gone, bows snapped or confiscated. A boy is collecting arrowheads in a sack like seashells. His mother tells him to leave them. He keeps one, holds it tight. Maybe it's a souvenir. Maybe it's a reminder. Even the siege engines are being dismantled. The mangonel you grew weirdly fond of is now a pile of lumber. The trebuchet lies silent, its arm disassembled, its counterweight hauled off for scrap. The engineers stand nearby, trading half-hearted jokes about using the leftover timber to build furniture. You hope they do. Night falls again, your first night under occupation. There are no drums, no arrows, no insults from the walls. Just the low hum of rebuilding, hammers in the distance, voices calling for rope, for stone, for nails. You lie down in what's left of your bunk. It smells like dust and smoke, but at least it's dry. Through a cracked window, you see the enemy's flag flapping on the tower. You thought it would sting more. You turn away. You whisper good night to no one in particular, not because it's peaceful, but because it's finally, unmistakably over. The first thing you notice is the sound of hammers, not the frenzied clanging of wartime smithing, but the slow, purposeful rhythm of rebuilding, as if the stone itself has started to breathe again. Tap, pause, shift. Tap, pause, shift. You stand in the courtyard, watching as men and women hoist beams into place, replace shattered doors, and sweep out rooms that still smell faintly of smoke and fear. It's a strange thing, seeing the castle come back to life, not as a fortress preparing for battle, but as a home, or at least something pretending to be one. Everywhere you look, things are being fixed. Bent railings straightened, scorched walls whitewashed. A boy is painting over an arrow slot like it never existed. He hums. You realize you've gone hours without the sound of weapons. Yet under it all, there's a quiet tension. You hear it in the murmurs of people, asking if they'll stay or if they'll move on. You feel it in the way workers glance over their shoulders, still expecting a trumpet call, a shouted order, the return of chaos. Because while the siege is over, siege season never really ends. You walk along the wall path. The breach from the undermining effort has been filled with a temporary wooden barricade. It's ugly, clearly rushed, but functional. Two masons stand nearby, arguing over whether to rebuild it as it was or do something smarter this time. One suggests using brick. The other suggests never living in a castle again. You can't blame him. Historians note that after many sieges, defenders chose to reinforce and adapt. Thicker walls, rounded towers to better deflect projectiles, defensible courtyards, and improved gatehouses. Some even added outer moats, new towers, or backup keep walls in case the first layer fell. Each stone laid not just to rebuild, but to anticipate the next attack, because there was always a next time, a fringe detail. Some castles, after being besieged, were intentionally partially ruined by their own lords, just enough to discourage occupation by new owners if the enemy ever returned. Self-sabotage as strategy. If we can't keep it, no one can. You pass the kitchen, where the cook is slicing dried apples, clearly rationed, but not hidden anymore. He offers you one. You chew it slowly, thinking about how silence tastes different when it isn't framed by the threat of collapse. In the great hall, tapestries are being rehung, patched, rewoven, stained with more than wine. A servant tries to scrub a wall where blood dried weeks ago. She hums under her breath. You don't ask the song's name. Everywhere, things are being sorted. Keepsakes from corpses, coins from the dead counted and redistributed, not as plunder, but as inheritance. Survivors sifting through rubble, not to forget, but to make sense of what remains. You help a stonemason for a while, lifting rubble into a wheelbarrow. He tells you this was the third siege he's lived through in this castle. It always gets worse before it gets better, he says. Then it gets worse again. You smile. Barely. Some families have already left. You see carts rolling away at dawn, pulled by tired oxen, loaded with nothing but cloth bundles and sleeping children. Too much memory in the walls, one father says. We'll find something new, something quieter. Others stay, as if out of stubbornness. If they break it again, a woman tells you, while planting herbs near the tower, I'll just plant twice as much next spring. And of course, the soldiers remain, or at least some of them, those not buried or broken. Some choose to stay on as guards for the new regime, which earns them suspicious glances from former comrades. Others leave with nothing but a dull blade and a letter of dismissal. Thanks for surviving. Now go. You follow one of them to the blacksmith's corner, where the forge has been lit, not for arrowheads or spear tips, but for horseshoes and hinges. The smith barely glances up as he says, We're back to honest work now, at least until autumn. You pass a corner where someone has hung a crude banner stitched from scavenged cloth. It reads, Still standing, a bit dramatic maybe, but not untrue. You find yourself in the old barracks, now empty, except for the sound of wind passing through cracked shutters. You sit on your cot, same as ever, but with less fear. Just exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your ribs. You lie back. Through the high window, you can see the rebuilt parapet, the new scaffolding, a carpenter standing on a beam with a hammer in his teeth. The siege is done. The defenses are rising. But part of you wonders, is this resilience or ritual? Is rebuilding just a pause between disasters? Historians still puzzle over this. Why rebuild a castle that fell so easily? Why return to stone walls that can be undermined, burned, smashed to bits? Maybe because what else is there? Castles were more than fortresses. They were homes, towns, symbols of pride. To abandon them was to admit defeat, not just in war, but in purpose. So they rebuilt. Every time. You close your eyes, just for a moment. In your dreams, stones rise from the ground, fitting themselves into place. Wooden towers stretch skyward, like reaching hands. Moats fill. Gates creak back into alignment. A castle reborn, not because it's safe, but because it's necessary. Tomorrow, maybe another army comes. Or maybe next spring. Or maybe never again. But tonight, the hammers keep tapping. And the castle dares to hope. The sky is clear today. A flat blue stretch without storm clouds, or smoke, without birds even, just stillness. You sit on the wall, legs dangling, the stones warm under you. For the first time in what feels like years, no one's shouting orders. No one's counting arrows. There are no fire jars, no drums, just peace. Or at least, the kind that follows exhaustion. You look out over the valley. The battlefield is green again. Patches of grass pushing up through old trampling grounds. Siege lines faded to vague paths in the dirt. The outlines of war still linger, faint but stubborn, like chalk drawings after a rain. The trebuchets are gone. The mangonels, dismantled. The ballistae, reduced to parts, now rumored to be a chicken coop on the edge of town. You're not sure if that's funny or just symbolic. Probably both. And yet the impact of all those machines remains. Because siege engines didn't just shape castles, they shaped history. Every medieval stronghold was designed, in some way, in response to them. Tall walls evolved into angled fortifications, made to deflect incoming missiles. Moats grew wider, gatehouses more complex. The siege engine forced the castle to grow up. Historians still debate whether siege engines made castles obsolete or merely improved them. After all, for every wall that fell to a trebuchet, another was built thicker, tougher, smarter. For every siege tower, there was a new hoarding, a new murder hole, a new trick. But the influence went even further. Cities fortified their borders. Armies began to travel with entire siege trains. Dozens of engineers, carts of rope, barrels of pitch, packs of oxen. Warfare slowed, but became more deliberate, strategic. Siege engines turned war from a skirmish into a science, and the engineers revered. Not just laborers anymore, but masters of mechanics and math, prophets of pressure and leverage. They calculated trajectories with string and chalk. They translated force into fear. They designed weapons that didn't just kill, but demoralized. A fringe tidbit, some medieval commanders hired traveling siege specialists, engineers for hire who brought their own plans, their own tricks, and sometimes even their own crews, like mercenary physicists. One was reportedly paid in land, another in barrels of mead. Fair enough. You glance at the towers rising again around you. Their shapes have shifted, rounded corners, braced with iron. You remember when they were rubble. You also remember the sound of a trebuchet arm releasing, the thick thunk, the sigh of ropes, the cry that followed. It's hard to forget, but you also remember laughter after a ladder team collapsed into mud, the absurdity of watching a man wave a fish at the enemy, a puppet made of sticks that looked like the enemy commander, a turnip launched in place of a stone. Siege warfare wasn't just violent, it was human, in all its stubbornness, weirdness, creativity, and madness. And its legacy lives on in strange places. In games, where players build wooden towers and calculate sling trajectories with glee. In films, where castles are leveled in glorious slow motion. In books, where every fortress is either falling or preparing to. Even in the language we speak, phrases like battering ram, siege mentality, breach of security, traces of a time when your best hope of survival involved stacking wood, tension, and gravity in just the right way. You lie back against the parapet, arms folded behind your head. A bird lands beside you, just a fat little crow, eyeing you like it owns the place. You share the moment. It flaps away. You stay. For a second, you try to imagine a world where all this never happened, where walls didn't need to be tested, where castles stood purely as palaces, not as places to endure. But that's not the world you know. The world you know was built from tension and timber, from clever designs and desperate plans, from ropes stretched to the breaking point, and sometimes from the moments after the breaking, when you pick up the pieces and figure out how to live again. So now, you exhale, let your shoulders drop, let your breath come slower, easier, deeper. The battlefields fade, the towers crumble into memory, the siege machines, those wild constructions of rope and timber, of tension and hope, are packed away in the dusty corners of history. They won't creak tonight. They won't fire. You're not on a wall anymore. You're somewhere soft, somewhere quiet. The fires have burned out. The horns have gone silent. There's just the faint echo of hammers rebuilding, distant as waves. And you rest. You've seen it all. Siege towers tipping like drunken giants, engineers muttering about physics with smoky hands, defenders launching turnips and insults in equal measure. You've marched through moats, ducked under hoardings, watched rats and nobles sleep side by side. It's all behind you now. Let the stones fall away. Let the ropes loosen. Let the gears stop grinding. The night is long, but peaceful. The danger has passed. And even if it hasn't, even if the world still feels like it's under siege sometimes, you know how to wait it out. You know how to breathe through it, to outlast it. So settle in, close your eyes, and remember, whatever the walls were made of, whatever the enemy tried, you endured. Sleep now. The drawbridge is up. The gates are closed. You are safe.